Hello everyone, I'm Edith. I come from Normandy in France. I'm 27 years old. I'm a nurse, and I lived for 5 years on a little island near to Madagascar called Réunion. I grew up in a Catholic family, so God was in my life since I was born. I have 3 brothers, and we went to Mass every Sunday with our parents. I was quiet and shy. I always tried to be obedient and to follow the rules because I wanted to be accepted. I was a perfectionist and wanted to always please others, but this was more out of fear than out of love. God seemed distant. I found it difficult to express myself to others. I didn't want to be a burden to them. I learned to push my feelings down and to carry on, regardless of how I felt. When I was around 7 years old, my mom had a baby. As the only girl, I had really hoped that the baby would be a girl. I already had an older brother and a younger brother. I was very disappointed that the baby was another boy. It was difficult for me to accept that no one seemed to care how difficult that was for me at that time. Don't get me wrong, I have loved that little boy from the beginning. I still love him, and I'm very proud of him. But I didn't know at that time how to deal with that disappointment in the middle of the joy of his birth. My first personal encounter with God was during adoration time in my first faith camp. I was 8 years old. I didn't know anyone during this first camp, so I followed the group, but I didn't really understand what was happening. What I had to do, and I had difficulties to making friends. That special day, we were in the chapel, and there were many children around me, but I was cold, alone, and lost, and in pain due to a fall. The Blessed Sacrament was exposed. I looked at him, and I realized that he was alive, he was present, he saw me, and he listened to me. Jesus touched my heart, despite all difficulties. Later that year, I received my first Holy Communion. I do not remember much about that day, but I did receive a little book of scripture quotes from my godmother. One of the quotations in the book really struck me. It was from the book of Deuteronomy. I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life. This is interesting because at this time I began to ask myself about the meaning of my life. At the age of 10, I joined the Scouts of Europe. This opportunity to live all these experiences and adventures was kind of a coincidence. It's obvious now, for me, that it was a gift from God, especially because that's an important part of my life and helped me to become the woman who I am today. It helped me grow spiritually and practically. I grew up with these girls. I learned a lot about practical things, like how to light a fire or build a shelter. I also learned to take responsibilities, to sacrifice myself, to lead, to pray, and to grow in my relationship with God. At the same time, each Sunday, I served at Mass with my brothers. I was happy to have something to do. I was also happy to understand better what happens during Holy Mass, and that helped me to be more attentive to what the priest said. So I began to go to Holy Mass because I liked it, and not just because I had to do it. When I was 12, I was really struggling with doubt and fear. As a consequence of pushing down my emotions for many years, I began to believe that I wasn't important or good enough. My thinking got very dark, and I began to think that others didn't care about me. I often felt lonely, but found it difficult to let other people in. It was at this point in my life I made my Scout promise, and I formally became a Scout. At the time, I was not very prepared, but later I discovered what I have committed to when I made this promise: to be honest, ready to serve, and purity. I realized that although we tried to grow in these virtues in the Scouts, I had also committed to apply them to my whole life. When I was 14, I received the sacrament of confirmation. I wanted to be confirmed, not because everyone else was, but because I wanted to learn more about God and improve my relationship with Him. So, during my years in high school, my prayer became something that I could do at home by myself. So, I prepared a prayer space in my bedroom. And my last year in school was very busy. I worked very hard to graduate as I wanted to be a nurse. During this time, my fears and doubts were quite under control. I continued to pray, to go to Mass, and to have good friendship in the Scouts. With God's help, I managed to pass my exams and went on to study nursing. I often thought about and took strength from the Bible verse in the book that I had received from my first communion. I started nursing school in Alençon, which was over 100 kilometers from home. It was my first time living away from my family and friends. Nursing school was full of many challenges. I put a lot of pressure on myself to achieve. I tried to be like everyone else, to be normal, even although I didn't know what that was, so it was impossible to reach it. As I said, many times as a teenager, I felt like I was in a very dark place. I loved studying, nursing, but during this time, when I felt alone and felt like I had to do everything by myself, the problems seemed bigger, the temptations were stronger. There seemed to be no hope, no words, no tears, only me, my pain, my loneliness. I was very tired of fighting against myself. There were many times I wanted to give up, but whenever this happened, that scripture quotation came back to me. Jesus was there, with me. He never left me alone. Every time I wanted to give up because it was too hard for me, I heard this sentence in my heart, the word I had often reflected on from my first communion book. I put before you death and life. Choose life. That day, I felt as though Jesus said to me, you choose life, and I will carry everything else for you and fight for you. Once again, I was exhausted and looking to make a sense of my life. Thankfully, before doing something desperate, I fell on my knees and prayed. I understood in that moment that Jesus was asking me to choose life. Inspired by the Holy Spirit, I made this promise. Whatever happens, I choose life for love of Him. With Jesus, that day, He overcame my darkness. Now, there is always a light, and so, no matter how deep I fall, I'm able to find a way back to Him, following His light. I finally graduated when I was 20 and decided that I needed a fresh start and some adventure. My dad's family lived on Reunion, so this seemed like the obvious place to go. This beautiful island has tropical weather, beautiful mountains and landscape, and many places to hike and explore. During these 5 years, my faith grew deeper. I had the opportunity to share and learn about faith with my grandparents. I also did retreats and formation days and different volunteering in associations or in parishes, until finally God guided me again to the Scouts. My faith has also a place in my professional life. For example, I never went to work without praying before. When I started in the hospital, I had a very little experience and still had a lot of fear. But I would pray and ask God to lead me to the right unit or job. This helped me to make decisions and to take risks that I couldn't on my own. That's not to say that everything was easy, because working in a hospital is very difficult and there are many challenges and responsibilities. When I arrived in a new unit, I tried to do what I always did, to be obedient and to push myself to do my best. I felt a lot of pressure to fit in. This often led me to overwork, and there was very little balance in my life. I still found it difficult to express my needs and my wants. After a hard day's work, I would return to my house and feel alone. I would often spend time in prayer asking God to give me the strength to continue serving the patients in the hospital, regardless of how hard it was. This time at work was difficult. I learned a lot about myself, especially in my desire to be normal and to fit in. I realize now that this is not what God is calling me to. I had been comparing myself to others to see if I had reached normality, but I realized that I didn't have the same perspective and values that they had. I didn't want to change my values for them. Through my work and my involvement in the Scouts, I grew in confidence and skills and became more aware of my needs and my worth. I became more at peace with myself and compared myself to others a lot less. During this time, we entered the COVID crisis. This was a particularly difficult time to be working in a hospital. A new difficulty arose for me in that stressful period, the COVID vaccine. In accordance with what I knew, my values and my beliefs, I chose to not be vaccinated, even though I would have to leave my job if I didn't. I had no backup plan. So, in my decision, I had to surrender to God's providence. This complete surrender helped me to build a stronger and deeper relationship with God and to trust Him more. As I was not able to work in the hospital, at first I really enjoyed my free time, because after the hectic work situation, it was like being on holiday. The first 3 weeks were like a dream, but quickly I had to face myself, my issues, my temptations, and my difficulties. I really felt lonely, however my days weren't empty. I saw friends, served in different places, and studied. Every day I had to work on seeking God's will for my present and future, and looking for peace. After working on and off for a year, I was really trying to hear God and where He wanted me to be. That led me to leave Réunion, to go back in France. It was hard to surrender myself and my life into God's plan, because my plan was to wait until I had everything sorted in France before I left Réunion. But this was not God's plan. I felt the call to leave my life I had built in Réunion and to move back to France. So I did, took few suitcases and sold everything else. When I arrived back in Normandy, I felt that God was calling me into a deeper trust in Him, not to rely on the security of having a job and a house like I had in Réunion. Instead, I felt called to spend more time in prayer and really seeking His will before I would make any big decisions. I tried to pray daily, and I asked advice from my friends and family that I knew and in whom I trusted to help me in my discernment. I decided to make a personal retreat in the community of my spiritual director, which was very helpful. I got some clarity on what God was calling me to, but knew I needed to work on my relationship with Him. My spiritual director suggested that I spend some time in Medjugorje. I knew nothing about Medjugorje, but the opportunity came up for me to live there with a French sister and others volunteer in a little community with a common spiritual life and to work serving the pilgrims. It was a beautiful experience, both spiritually and personally. I discovered Medjugorje and its messages. I learned a lot about how to live more united with God in my daily life. I learned also about my Catholic faith, and we studied the Bible. I really enjoyed that time, being in service and meeting pilgrims every day. I learned that I needed and wanted this formation and the opportunity to grow in my faith. I found that this way of life, study, prayer, community, and work really suited me. So my spiritual director suggested me that I apply for Holy Family Mission. I did, even if I didn't believe that I could be accepted, especially because of my bad English. I am so grateful for being able to live here with all the crazy community members, building some wonderful friendships with them, It has been a roller coaster, but it has really helped me grow in knowing myself better, in knowing God better, and in deepening my relationship with Him. Finally, for those who think that they haven't seen a miracle, I just want to say, here I am, speaking English in front of you all. Now that's a miracle. I want to thank you all for listening to me, for your prayers and support for us through the year. God bless you all.